Hey folks, Brittany Stewart coming to you today again. I want to do another video to go a little bit more in depth on some other nuance and things around this whole Pete Buttigieg, Gavin Newsom, Rahm Emanuel messaging stuff that's going on. And I want this video, this is specifically aimed at my trans community, my fellow trans people out there. So if you're not a trans community member, this video is not for you. You can feel free to move along. But for those of you who are trans and have started following me on social media, or, maybe you don't know who I am. So first off, let me introduce myself. My name's Brittany Stewart. My maiden name was Novotny. So you might find stuff about Brittany Novotny that's me. I'm a trans woman. I affirmed my gender in 2005 and have been living authentically and openly for 20 years now. And I'm an attorney, a civil rights attorney. I was the first out trans political candidate for office in Oklahoma history in 2010, when I took on a notorious homophobe and transphobe by the name of Sally Kern. That got me a lot of media attention back at that time, so some of you may have heard of me around then. In my career, I was on a trial team that won a $1 million+ verdict in Oklahoma in 2017 for a university professor who was trans. It was the first sex discrimination case under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act for a trans woman to go to a jury trial. And this was 3 years before the Bostock decision came down that said sex discrimination includes trans people. So I've been around a while. I've been fighting these fights. I also was counsel on the case challenging North Dakota's gender-affirming care ban. So yes, I do this work for a living. I'm out there on the front lines of these fights day in and day out. And that's part of why I'm so, concerned about this rhetoric and where it could take us. But I'm also concerned with how we as a community respond to things and how we respond to criticism that comes back at us. Because I know a lot of you don't want to hear it, and that some of you, vehemently disagree, and that's okay. If that's you, please, I hope you'll at least hear me with an open mind. But Sarah McBride is right on some things. She is right that if we are going to win and push back against this tide that has begun chipping away and taking away our rights that we've built up over the years, that is gonna, unfortunately, will have to include a coalition of people who don't fully support us. And those of you who've maybe followed me in the last couple days or saw my last video, I am critical of the language being used by candidates, and I'm not trying to give anyone a free pass here. But there is truth to the fact that we will have to work with people who don't agree with us, and probably specifically on the trans kids in sports issue. I've seen the same numbers that the consultants who are running Scared have seen. Like I can understand where that instinct is coming from for them. And I understand why we're so upset about it, because we truly do understand that, sports is just the foot in the door to wedge it open and take away our rights in every other aspect. So I am not trying to minimize any of that at all. I was trying to lead by example on this Pete issue, and those of you who followed me for a while or followed my work for a long time know I'm usually very much pragmatic. I really try to hold fire and don't go after moderates. I personally identify as a moderate liberal. Like, I don't necessarily identify as far left. and that's okay. And you can, and that's cool too. I believe we all have different perspectives to bring to the table. But something I have seen and that I think contributed to some of the negative reaction I got for my own criticism is that there were some people who were just immediately, well, Pete's a transphobe, he's thrown us under the bus, it's the end of it, don't ever want to hear from him again. And I think that touched a nerve among a certain group of moderate people who are rightfully scared about continuing down this road of fascism, and for whom it seems reasonable to say, well, there's only, 15 trans kids playing sports in the country. Maybe now's not the time to let 15 kids bring us into 4 more years of fashion. It's kind of gross to say, hey, I'm willing to give up the rights of people just because it's such a small group. It is gross, but when we just immediately shove those people out and yell at them and call them transphobes, we make it harder to build the coalition we're going to need, and harder to bring them over to our side. Because, ostensibly, hopefully, these are people that are winnable if they're already Democratic voters that aren't in line necessarily with Republicans, that we will have to move them with us at some point. So, one of the things I had a really long conversation with one of our trans elders who was doing this work 20 years before even I was. And, she also was talking to me. She worries about the amount that social media pushes rage bait headlines that get the worst reactions out of us. I know we're on edge. We shouldn't have to be policing ourselves and worrying about what we say and how we say it. But because we are a pretty small community, we won't get anything that we want to see without having some friends and allies and finding ways to make common cause with people who aren't all the way there with us yet. And so I think we have to be careful. And so I was trying to be very careful and couch my responses to Pete with, look, I like Pete. I think he has a heart. I think, I don't think he's an evil person. But I think he got this language wrong. And I stand by that. If Pete or anyone in his orbit is watching this or comes across this video, please reach out. I'm happy to talk to you all about what we know, those of us who work on this day in and day out, what we know moves people and how we can start moving those conversations. For instance, I think Pete would have done just fine to thread the needle of where he was trying to go, which I think is trying to say there's a place for you in our party, even if you don't agree with us. I think that's what he was ultimately trying to get at, but he did it in a way that ceded a lot of ground rhetorically. And that's my concern. And I think a lot of our concerns, and not all of us are great at articulating that, and we're just scared and have every right to be scared and upset right now. So one of the things, I think we have to do is lead with value statements that connect us to our fellow Democratic voters. So the value statement I'm leading with now, and you might have seen me post it on Threads or Facebook this morning, is, the Democratic Party that I've spent, the good chunk of my adult life helping to build is a party that stands for the value that all Americans have a right to fully participate in society. That's a core value to me of the Democratic Party I've been active in and trying to build. And I think it's a core value a lot of my fellow Democrats would also agree to. So I think what Pete should have done, when he was asked that open-ended question by Inskeep, and this is where a lot of us are upset with the way he took this open-ended question. Like, Inskeep said, Rahm Emanuel says a man can't be a woman. And then Pete launches into trans kids in sports. Right? That's what Pete could have done at that question is said, look, I'm a Democrat, and as a Democrat, I believe that all Americans have an equal right to fully participate in society and be full and equal participants in America. And start with that value statement to say, here's what we value, here's our connection. Then launch into, and you know what? I'm a parent too, and I can understand why parents who have seen some of the news that's been pushed onto them in the last few years might feel scared or concerned or upset. And I, as a parent, I can understand that feeling. And so I've looked into this too, because I'm also a parent. And what I've found is that, letting some trans kids play in middle school and high school sports doesn't actually hurt anybody. And it's really just about some kids wanting to play play sports with their friends at school. It's just kids wanting to have the same opportunity as anyone else. So connect with people on our shared values. And if you think that doesn't work, I'll give you an example from my own career. That jury verdict I was talking about a little bit ago in Oklahoma. Right, this is a jury verdict of over $1 million for discrimination against a trans woman in Oklahoma. We had, in that jury, it was for the Western District of Oklahoma in federal court. And that's a big chunk of the state. So that meant, even though the trial was taking place in liberal Oklahoma City, our jurors were coming from rural areas. We had a juror that was the wife of a preacher in a rural town about an hour outside of Oklahoma City. And we got a unanimous verdict in our favor. The way we did that was by connecting on that fundamental fairness issue. So we didn't get into a bunch of trans stuff. We didn't hide the fact that she was a transgender woman. We talked about it. We said she is a transgender woman. We let them fill in the blank as to what that meant to them. We didn't try to explain it or get into the weeds on it. It was just a fact that was just kind of thrown out there, like, well, of course, like it's just a normal thing. And by us treating it kind of like nonchalantly and not acting like this is all about trans rights and you have to be for trans rights today, we weren't asking for a heavy lift of people who would automatically be against trans rights, because if they thought of it in those terms, they might not be for us. So what we did is, we connected on our theme of fundamental fairness. And so one of the first things we did was during jury selection. So before we've even picked our jury, but our jury is going to come from this pool of people. We asked the jurors, how many of you have been in scouts, like Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, any of the scouting? Hands start going up all in the jury box. And so then we go, okay, well, so if you're in scouts, you earn a merit badge, right? And heads start nodding. Yeah. And if you do X, Y, and Z, then your troop leader, gives you the merit badge because you knocked off the X, Y, and Z that you had to complete to get that badge. And more heads are nodding. Well, yeah, of course. And then we, asked an open-ended question. Well, how would you feel if you did X, Y, and Z, and then you took your sheet to your scoutmaster, and they said, well, you don't get the merit badge because I don't like who you are? How would you feel about that? Some hands go up. Well, I think that would be wrong. So now we already have connection with our jury on something we can all relate to, scouting as kids. Fairness, that if you do what's required of you, you're supposed to get what you're supposed to get, and you shouldn't be denied just because of who you are. So we hit these fundamental American values of everybody should be treated fairly and have the same opportunities. And that worked. That unanimous jury, they've ruled on 3 of 4 counts in our favor unanimously, because we put it to them in terms they could understand. We didn't ask them to do something they thought was a bridge too far or taking some new step in a new direction. And another thing we did is we never let on that this was a historical jury trial. We actually intentionally kept activists away from the courthouse because we didn't want those jurors coming in feeling like they were being asked to do anything extraordinary. And to us, it wasn't extraordinary. All we were asking them to do was to say this trans woman was discriminated against because of her sex. And we had emails from, the human resources person saying exactly that, basically. So, we had the evidence, and all we needed them to do was be able to put the evidence together and say, yeah, that's wrong. And so we did. And so that's where I'm coming from with this, is that we do need to find ways to reach people who might say some terrible stuff right now or be misinformed. And so I want us to be careful not to take rage bait all the time, and to be careful in how we respond, even if people are being mean to us. And I got to do better too sometimes. So don't think I'm only preaching at y'all. I'm preaching to me too. But this is so ridiculous that we find ourselves in this situation, and I totally get why we're mad, why we're upset, why we're scared. We're watching what's going on in the UK. That's particularly scary. But I'll tell you this. I have national connections. I'm reaching out to them. What I am trying to do actively behind the scenes is, that trans elder that I was speaking to, we're trying to get a group of us together, and we're going to see if we can't get Pete to sit down with us to hear us out about how he can tweak his approach here. Because if he truly is just trying to reach those people who aren't with us and make sure they know they got a seat at the table, then that's great. We need him to do that, but we just want him to do it in a way that doesn't, unintentionally, further transphobia in our society. And I think he did that because, since I've been involved in Democratic Party politics since 2008, I've been through some fights. I was there for the Hillary versus Obama primary. I was there for Bernie versus Hillary. I've been through some fights, y'all. And I'll tell you, I've seen more transphobia surfacing among fellow Democrats responding to my criticism of Pete in the last 2 days than I've seen in the last 10 years. So I get it. There's a very good reason for us to be concerned. But I just want y'all to think strategically about how we're engaging in social media, and be careful not to paint with a broad brush and start running people off, because we are ultimately going to have to work with some people we don't fully agree with, and that will be part of it. And at least some of us will, not all of us. Some of you won't. One of the things I also think we've got to do, those of us around our states and communities, is get involved in actual, community work in your local towns and cities where you are, and not necessarily in trans or LGBT related stuff. Just find volunteer opportunities to get out there in your community and just continue to meet people who are involved. The way I built a lot of great inroads in Oklahoma City over the years before I moved up to Minnesota was by that. I served on boards, on advisory boards, and just became a presence where people got to know a real life trans person when it was stuff not dealing with anything trans related. And so it gave us some freedom to get to know each other as real people and not just caricatures or anything. So we've got to make allies. So keep making friends, be out there, but be careful in how we attack those politicians on the Democratic side. Not because they deserve to not take heat, but just we do have to be careful with how we do our criticism, so that we don't get just ignored, where people are just like, oh, it's those loudmouths again. And I've seen a little bit of that. And so I want us to be careful. I know we can't police all of it or stop all of it. And we don't even know how many accounts are really actual trans people doing this, and how many are sock puppet accounts that are being used to create division in our community. But for those of us that are real people, let's do our best to be careful not to only be pushing rage all the time. We are going to have to make friends and inroads. I want to make sure whatever candidates we have in the future have better language. So I'm going to be doing work behind the scenes to try to get that language to them and find those folks who want to really do better at this. And if you're one of those folks and you want to run for office, feel free to reach out to me, DM me, give me a comment, whatever. I'm happy to talk to you about what running for office looks like. I've managed campaigns. I've been a candidate. I've knocked thousands of doors in Oklahoma, Colorado, Oregon, Minnesota. So I've done work in a lot of states and a lot of different environments. And I've done a lot of courtroom work in North Dakota and Oklahoma. So, I've had to talk with a lot of people who aren't always our friends and allies. So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about. It's kind of a long video. I hope you stayed through to the end. I'm doing my best here to try to stay involved in our community, beyond just my legal work, because we got a big battle ahead of us and a lot of work to do to regain what we're losing. And so, thank you all for sticking through this. Keep your heads up. It's scary, but we've been through worse before, and we can get back to where we were. It's going to take some work and some time and effort. So hang in there. We only have each other. Only we can save us. No one can be our savior. But we can certainly try to help them get better at how to approach it, so that hopefully we keep making more friends and not pushing people away. All right, y'all. Bye.